We're getting settled now for a look at drug prices. Just give us a second to have everybody in their seats. Won't take long. As a reminder, and it was hard even for me to see at the beginning during the last session, but if you have questions, you can email them to whcquestions@worldcongress.com. It appears periodically on the monitors, but it was tough to see, so maybe in the back that was too big of a challenge. I think we're almost ready. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I don't think that there's a topic in healthcare that has gotten more traction and stays on the top of mind of the public and policymakers as drug prices. So I'm really pleased to be able to work with this panel today to explore the topic and more specifically what could be done to restrain the spending on drugs, or alternatively to get more value from the money that is spent on pharmaceuticals. So I hope that you will join me in welcoming our panelists. We'll follow the same format as the last one, and we'll go with some brief opening remarks, and then I think we're going to, because of the distinguished panelists we have, really focus on the conversation that we can have about those topics, including comments from you. I already have seen some Twitter activity. The reminder there is WHCC 17, so that's another way to try and get things up in front of us. So let's start then. Immediately to my left is Jeff Myers, President and CEO of Medicaid Health Plans of America. So Jeff, if you have opening remarks, this would be a great time to make them.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me today. This is a topic that I come to naturally. I used to be a pharmaceutical person for about 10 years prior to becoming a payer. And drug pricing is really, I think, a key issue for all of us, but for Medicaid especially. If any of you were in our panels earlier talking about the size and growth of Medicaid, Medicaid has become almost the single most important player in the healthcare space because of its rapid growth. It now covers 1 in 5 Americans, and because it pays more than 52% of long-term care costs, it's a middle-class entitlement for the bread and butter generation that has to worry about their kids and their older parents. It is an enormous program, and it has, as part of the program, a design to purchase pharmaceuticals that was designed back when fee-for-service was the predominant model. That doesn't exist anymore. 73% of Medicaid enrollees are now in full cap risk programs. And when my members look at drugs and drug pricing, they see great potential in all of the new science that's coming out from our pharmaceutical partners. But we have a real concern about the ever-escalating cost. And if you look at that ever-escalating cost in Medicaid, the challenge for this is that every single dollar in Medicaid is paid for by taxpayers. We can't adjust a benefit package. We don't get to drive copays and deductibles like you have in other markets. This is paid for by the taxpayer. So when we have a segment of healthcare where the value created is no longer attached to the cost of manufacture, it creates a real problem. If you think about most insurance, there is a requirement that a large portion of the revenue that comes in is paid out in medical services. In Medicaid, it's a mandatory 85%. But if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, I think the challenge that we see is that the cost of goods manufactured is somewhere between 13 and 21%. And that 13 and 21% is very close to the cost of SG&A and marketing. So the money spent in the market is spent more for marketing and management than it is for making the drugs. Now, we know that research is important, and that research arm is not free. This is a very high-risk endeavor, and for my members, something we want the pharmaceutical industry to be successful in, because that's how we're going to bend the cost curve. But from our point of view, the only way to really address it in Medicaid, which, as I mentioned, is 100% taxpayer funded, is to start thinking about how that risk gets shared. In our marketplace, hospitals, doctors, nursing homes, others are all beginning to share risk. You've seen certain companies and certain drugs tentatively approach a value-based purchasing arrangement, but the reason that they're approaching it so slowly is because the regs aren't clear. There are significant legal obstacles on the pharmaceutical side in terms of anti-inducement, anti-kickback, and other items that really make them think twice about how to get into a value-based purchasing arrangement. But until we have those, it's going to be very, very hard to drive costs down. Because ultimately, and this is not this doesn't make the pharmaceutical industry the bad guy, it is just a simple fact that the structure of drug pricing is all designed around differentials, so that the headline cost that you see in the paper is very rarely the cost paid by the end user, because the rebate that's hidden is structured all over the market. And from our point of view, one of the largest challenges is that because Medicaid is so big, that rebate is being built in, driving costs higher, and ultimately makes the program unsustainable. So from our point of view, I'll just close with this, that we absolutely believe the pharmaceutical industry is going to be the engine of innovation that helps us bend costs. The question is, how do they do it? How can they join with us to start taking real risk? And to do that, I think our view is the management design around how the drugs get priced and sold in America really needs to be thought through, and we're delighted to have the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And I think it's a perfect segue to our next panelist, Dorothy Bennett-Hoffman, who's the head of U.S. Health Policy at Eli Lilly. Dorothy?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about this important issue. I've actually recently moved into a new role in the company focused on healthcare transformation and policy partnerships. And just building off of what Jeff said, I think we're at a really critical time, not only in our country, but with respect to innovation and the innovation that pharmaceutical companies like the one that I work for, Eli Lilly and Company, are producing. We have, over 140 years, at least for our company, have produced and created some amazing products to treat not only diabetes, but cancer, autoimmune diseases. And we want to be able to continue to innovate and provide medicines to people who need them. And people want that innovation. But there's a real tension point in the marketplace today with respect to affordability and consumerism for the system and for individuals. And so one of the things that I'm really trying to think through in my role is to figure out how can we work together, how can we bridge the gap across all of the stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem and find positive solutions. So for the last couple of years, I've led a policy initiative with Anthem where we have been calling for the transition from fee-for-service payments per unit for medicines, to value-based payments for our medicines. So payments that would be based on the outcomes that our medicines deliver for patients and for the system. And it's not just this isn't just words and a policy white paper that's calling for these changes. We're actually standing behind our products as well and piloting these types of approaches. So that's one, I think, positive solution. That's not the only solution that we're looking at. We're looking at issues addressing healthcare consumerism as well, and it's something that I'd like to be able to talk about in our panel as we get into it. With respect to consumerism, I think one of the major macro changes that we've seen in the country and that we have, I personally think, have agreed to as a nation is this movement toward high deductible health plans and healthcare consumerisms. And this isn't a new policy per se. You've really seen changes that have taken place starting in 2003 with the passage of the Medicare Modernization Act, which created the incentives for employers to put in place high deductible health plans. That type of innovation or type of approach really escalated with the Affordable Care Act. The individual market basically is a variation in high deductible health plans. And you think about what the current administration and the Congress talks about, seemingly talks about on a day-to-day basis related to healthcare reform. Again, it's all high deductible health plans and health savings accounts. So as we're asking individuals and patients to become more and more financially accountable for their care, that has implications not just for pharmaceuticals, but for the healthcare system overall. And that's another area of work that we're starting to take a closer look at as well.
Thanks, Dorothy. Our next panelist is Joshua Benner, who's the president and CEO of RxAnti. We had a great conversation getting ready for the panel, and I'm eager to hear from Joshua about his company and how it fits in with this topic.
Sure, thanks for the invitation to be here. As the representative of by far the smallest company on the stage, I'll just spend a moment introducing RxAnti. It's a 5-year-old business in the space of improving prescription drug use. And so our very strong belief is that we can get more from medicines if we were to only prescribe and take them better. There's a good body of science documenting about a $300 billion problem in this space. So if you think about it, we spend $325 billion or so on drugs. If we spend another $300 billion on the costs of underuse, overuse, and misuse of those drugs, then we have a pretty poor value proposition. And so RxAnti manages about 7 million lives for health plans, PBMs, and provider groups. We are focused on the issues of prescribing and adherence, with the goals for our clients of improving the quality of medication use, clinical quality scores, to which incentives are increasingly being attached in the health system, and also on containing costs of care. So there are a number of medications for which better use would result in savings on the medical side of what we spend in healthcare. So those are our core services, but I would say as it relates to drug costs, over the past year we've been invited into some very interesting conversations between payers and health plans and pharmaceutical manufacturers who are trying to do just what Dorothy described, these value-based contracts. And we think this is a concept with a whole lot of potential and a concept that can be transformative in our industry, but only if we can figure out a way to make these operational at scale. And so RxAnti just this year has actually developed some new services in collaboration with one health plan, UPMC Health Plan in Pittsburgh, to focus on the measurement of drug products' value, and to do that over time so that conversations about the value of medicines can be more informed, and so that when parties get together to talk about a value-based contract for a drug, they can have a conversation about what the apparent value of a product is in that population, what some of the potential parameters might be for a value-based contract going forward, and then we provide services to objectively measure value in a timely way over the life of one of these contracts so that everybody sees the score at all times and has an opportunity to improve their performance. So we're very excited about the potential for new models that can transform how we get more value from prescription drugs, and look forward to talking more about it.
Last but not least, Steve Miller from Express Scripts, Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer, is here for opening remarks and then to contribute to our discussion. Steve?
Great. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for being with us today. So I represent Express Scripts. I'm a basic scientist by training. I have developed a lot of drugs. If they had worked in clinical trials, I wouldn't be shilling for Express Scripts today. But what I want to talk about is actually we've been doing now value-based contracting for the last several years very successfully. So I'll give you a couple examples. And we're not talking about trying to figure out what the value of a drug is. We're trying to figure out how we can get the lowest price for our plans and our payers and then give additional value. So let me give you an example of one of the early ones we did. You all heard about how we drove down the price of hepatitis treatments, but one of the things that wasn't reported very much is that we guaranteed adherence on the drug. So not only did we give you a low price, but if the patient didn't take the drug for 84 days and get the cure, we refunded the money which the plan had paid for it. So that's a value above and beyond the cost of the drug. We've now taken that a lot further. So if you think about the highest cost class For most of you, it's the anti-inflammatory drugs, the drugs for rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease, psoriasis. We now have contracts with all of our providers in which if the patient changes drugs in the first 90 days, for whatever reason, doesn't matter if it's side effects or lack of clinical efficacy, the plan will get back 2/3 the cost of the drug. So these drugs average $3,000 a month. So either the employer or the plan sponsor will get back $2,000 for each month during the first 90 days, up to $6,000. So this is a value-based contract. It's the pharmaceutical manufacturer working with us to say, for that particular patient, this was a defective product. It didn't work. We'll refund 2/3 of the money. We now have contracts like this in multiple sclerosis, pulmonary disease, cancer, anti-inflammatories, hepatitis, cardiovascular disease, and others. So we believe that while we have to get better, because to get to the end point, we really want to be doing outcomes-based contracting, in the interim, we can do value-based contracting today. So we're really excited to share that with you all today.
Terrific. Thank you all for setting up the conversation so well. One of the things that I wanted to ask, and I think is related specifically to Steve's comments, is what's the right way to define value? It's something that Jeff brought up, and maybe we'll start with him, but how do you get to a point where the people who need to cooperate on this come to a common understanding and agreement about what the value is, and then how to figure out whether that, in fact, was met? So, Jeff, maybe you could talk to us about, from your point of view, what constitutes the value in this value-based approach?
It's a great question, because I was at a conference where I'm going to steal someone else's thoughts, that value-based purchasing is whatever you want it to be. It's almost become a Alice in Wonderland statement. So I guess when we think about it from a plan perspective, there are really three areas. The first, when we talk about value for the product, is over time, does that product create better health and help to bend the cost curve? Some things simply aren't, right? There are going to be cancer meds that probably aren't, because it makes people healthy and that's going to be expensive. There are others that really do need to bend the cost curve. And what I think we're trying to think through as plans as we enter into negotiations with manufacturers and others is that the first piece is there is a real problem with the way our structure of statute is written to be able to come to these agreements because of the way best price impacts pricing nationwide, because Medicaid now has 1 in 5 enrollees. So when you have to go into a supplemental rebate wrapper, the real question is, can you do it in a way that allows both the pharmaceutical manufacturer and the plan to see that value? The second piece, I think, from our perspective is, after you change some of the statutory restrictions, is who sees the data and how, right? How do we show the data to the manufacturer, and how do we get the value of the manufacturer's knowledge of that drug to our plans, ultimately for the benefit of our enrollees? You know, when I was in the drug world, I think it's fair to say that no one knows more about a specific drug than the guy who invented it. So how do we get that knowledge into the plan so that we help make sure the folks that should be on the drug are on the drug, and when there are side effects, how to pick that up? And then lastly, when we think about value-based purchasing, it's not just about the money. Everyone always equates value-based purchasing as being just an opportunity to drive more rebate. I think from our plan's perspective, because in Medicaid, you take full risk. You can't shift the risk on to someone else. Our goal is to reduce total cost of care and provide better outcomes. So working with manufacturers, yes, part of it is the ultimate cost of care, but it's also about what are the services that they can help us think through to make that drug work better. And that's why, in our view, it's a two-sided tale, and it's not always about the money.
Dorothy, you've had experience making one of these agreements work. How did you and Anthem go about this value definition?
Yeah, well, when we talk about value within the context of that policy partnership, we're looking at the value that our medicine is going to deliver in the marketplace. So once we've gotten through the development process of our medicines, I would say that when we're trying to define value in the development process, we're looking at factors like unmet need, societal need, the impact to patients. Once we're moving our product into the marketplace, we're starting to look at how is our product going to actually perform in the marketplace. In a clinical trial, the conditions for which we're testing patients, it's a pretty perfect environment. And when you bring those medicines out into the real world, you start to you remove that perfection. And so you don't know what's going to happen with your medicines once individuals start to take the medicines. And that's where the value-based contracting arrangements come in, because it gives us an opportunity to actually start to track and measure how the product is going to perform in the real world. Here we get to see, will our medicine perform to the level that we thought it would in the clinical trial? How will it impact a patient? How it will impact the healthcare system overall? So in our white paper with Anthem, where we're calling for the shift to value-based payment models, we're talking about that defining value based on on what our product will actually deliver for patients in the marketplace.
A follow-up question, does
Yes.
that mean that for a new drug you have to wait a while as a company before you're willing to go ahead with a value-based arrangement?
I think it depends. It depends on the product. We've certainly have had new products coming through our pipeline recently. Trulicity is one of them. It's a treatment for type 2 diabetes, where we have entered into a number of value-based contracting arrangements with national and regional payers. It is something that we actively look at when we are looking at our plans for our products. So I think it will be part of our plans in the future.
Jeff?
I'd just say that the one thing to keep in mind is that who gets all the value? I mean, it's great to talk about this, but let me be the skunk at the garden party for a second. One of the challenges with the pricing model that pharma pursues is they want all the value today, right? The problem with the Hep C price design was always the argument that, well, you're going to not do as many liver transplants, and years from now you're going to save money, so we need all the value today. And we need it. We don't want to share it with our other partners, the folks that are taking the drugs, the plans that are administering the drugs, the doctors that are doing it. And so one of the things that I think when we talk about value, because it's very amorphous and soft, that ultimately we need to really have a hard conversation about, is that value shared, and is the cash value of that seized by one party, where the cost of manufacture and R&D to get there no longer matches the value provided.
All right, Dorothy wants back in here, but
I'd like to go
don't
back.
give up to Steve and Joshua. We're going to
I just want to make sure that everyone's still awake.
When we're talking about a value-based contracting arrangement, these are multi-year arrangements. There's no exchange of dollars typically at the beginning of these contracts. And so when we're talking about them and we're measuring success for our products, we're putting in place agreements that not only are time-bound, maybe 1, 2, 3 years in place, but they also include two-way risk. There is no guarantee of what the payment of that product or the rebate of that product could look like. What we're saying is, if our product meets X endpoint or Y endpoint, the payment would look like this. If we don't meet it, the payment's going to look like that. And so a value-based contracting arrangement, I think it's easy to say that it's, the benefits flow, do they flow directly to us? Not necessarily. Both parties are going at two-way risk. And the vision for what we see for value-based contracting arrangements in the future is hopefully to have the outcomes actually tied to benefit design, so that patients realize the benefit of the arrangements as well.
Joshua, when it comes to this value definition and how the agreements actually get put into practice, what kinds of things need to be measured, and how often do they need to be measured to make them practical?
Right. So I'm sort of observing my seat and its position on this stage between a manufacturer and one of the biggest payers in the country at Express Scripts. And
is that okay?
It's great. This is where we live at RxAnti, is right in that intersection. And I think that the issue around how we define value is that the parties define it differently. And so if you're paying for the drugs, you think about value disproportionately as being around price and cost. And if you are the manufacturer of that product, you think about value more in terms of benefit. And some of those benefits, as Jeff pointed out, are very long term. And so the question is, how can we measure all of those elements of what ultimately is the value proposition of the product and make sure that we have some information in order to negotiate on? And so what we've begun to do is report on product level value based on the information that our health plan clients have for us to work with. And that includes how the medicine is prescribed relative to the other medicines in its class, so its market share and its volume of use, which gets to its cost at a population level. We report on how it's used by patients, so what is adherence and what is persistence, because nobody can expect the medication to bring benefit if it's not taken appropriately. And as everybody here knows, adherence and persistence are always a big part of any value-based contract arrangement. And then the last couple of things we try to measure are, what are the clinical outcomes that you can observe and measure over a 1 to 2 year period of time in patients taking each of these medicines? So if it's a medicine that's designed to reduce the frequency of relapse among multiple sclerosis patients, then we try to measure that. And if it's designed to prevent hospitalizations for hypoglycemia because it's a better diabetes product, then we measure the frequency of those events. And then we measure disease-related costs. What are the costs of diabetes-related care that this patient is incurring? And when we line all that up, the utilization and prescribing, the taking, the adherence and persistence by the patients, and the outcomes and the costs, and then we compare across products. Now, with that information available to parties on both sides of the table, we can have a really good conversation about what the value of this product ought to be, what it has been historically in this population, and what we want a contract in place to try to align incentives in order to achieve.
Steve, you've been very patient. We appreciate that. What's your view then on what the value definition should be? And then I have a question that's related to that, maybe, which is what proportion of Express Scripts business now is structured in a value-based, an explicit value-based way?
Yeah. So what you've seen going on beforehand is why value-based contracting hasn't worked. That is, we studied about 75 contracts that people had done over the last several years and said, why are all these launched with great fanfare and then they all disappear? Why do they not work? And it's because, and there's a couple of principles. One is they have to be really simple. And so if you can't have a clear definition with the pharmaceutical manufacturer on how to administer it. Second is it has to be administratively very easy, because otherwise the administrative costs eat up any of the savings. And so you want something that's simple, well-defined, and easy to administer. And so when you look at why we've been able to do value-based contracting already is because when we did adherence on hepatitis C, it was yes or no. And the plan got reimbursed for every cent they'd put towards the drug. When we talk about our rheumatoid arthritis, does the patient stop the drug or not? It's irrelevant why they did. I don't care if it's for non-adherence. I don't care if it's for side effects or lack of clinical efficacy. If the patient doesn't take the drug, the money comes back. By making it crystal clear, you're able to get into these contracts today. Now, what everyone else is talking about is actually aspirational. It's what we want to be doing, and we're doing the same thing also. And so everyone wants to eventually get to outcomes-based contracting, but outcomes-based contracting is going to be a lot more complicated until the cost of the administrative systems come down. And these can be done really well, and this is what RxAnty and others are trying to do. We have to be able to settle for, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And so when you look at our book of business, so the question you asked is, how many of our patients are actually on it? Each of these things has different uptake. For instance, I'll give you an example. In hepatitis C, we have 25 million members that are enrolled in our hepatitis C program. Should they need it, the guarantee for adherence is there. For things like diabetes, we have 10 million patients enrolled. For things like our cancer program, 15 million patients enrolled. And so it varies by the program because each of you have a different appetite as to what your needs are depending on your population.
Yeah, 1 second. I want to come back to you. The hepatitis C example has come up now a couple of times. And so, Steve points out, look, we're going to go with a simple one, which is adherence or money back, or we're going to make good on our adherence. Yeah, a warranty. And Dorothy brought up the time frames of 1 to 3 years, maybe longer, but I thought I heard you say deals in the range of 1 to 3 years. And your hepatitis C value proposition, as it was sold to your members, was reduction in transplants, which clearly has a much longer time frame than 1 to 3 years. And while it was likely related to adherence, that may not be the only part of the story. So, given those threads, could we just revisit the hepatitis C example, since it was such a shock to the system when those drugs, to the financial system when those drugs came out, and what you learned from that, or how you think about value now based on that experience?
Well, sure. Look, the value-based idea is great. It's great after you have several competitors in the space where you can start having real competition for price. The challenge is that today's guidelines for drug pricing encourage the manufacturer to price as high as possible. And when you have only one manufacturer, it could literally destabilize the marketplace. In the case of Hep C, the first year that Gilead's drug came out, it nearly destabilized several Medicaid programs. We literally had one state, 1/6 of their drug budget was on one drug for one symptom. That's not sustainable. And this is why it's great to talk about value-based purchasing, but to be the skunk in the room, we got to talk about prices. And the pricing problem for pharma is, I believe, the challenge that they face because they have now an over-reliance on specific market rebating. They live on rebates. So the cost of the drug is not what you read in the paper. It's cost minus whatever that rebate that's hidden is. And that rebate looks different all over the market. So that segmentation is in fact driving prices up to a way that is not possible. To get back to the Hep C market, because I think this is illustrative for the plans that have to take full risk. The base pharma model is to provide value in the market for whatever they're going to defer costs at some future date. But the pricing model is always, I want all the future value today. And that's not possible. So think about where we're going to be 2 years from now. I was just at a conference where I met with several manufacturers. They're looking at doing a therapeutic cure for sickle cell anemia. That is going to be an enormous game changer for Medicaid, where nearly 80% of sickle cell patients are on Medicaid and they're almost all in full risk plans. Guess how much that's going to be? That's going to be $1 million. How does a plan manage that over the life of the program? We really have to think through how the cash flows work so that pharma continues to get the advantage of their creation, but does it in a way that matches closer the cost of that design. And right now, we don't have that anymore. We've really moved to a spot where the pricing model is completely divorced from the cost of production and the cost of development. That cannot continue in the healthcare system if you want to bend the cost curve, you can't have a major segment of the healthcare system divorced from that reality. And that's why I think value-based purchasing is great, totally love it, it's going to get there. But the real issue is we have to figure a way to really start thinking about how products get rationally priced in the market so that you don't destabilize major segments of the healthcare system.
Josh, I saw you itching to say something, and dive in here.
I wanted to follow up on Steve's point about the operational challenges in value-based contracting, and I think it's a great point. I wanted to just share an example of a relationship we've observed pretty closely between a manufacturer and a payer, and how it worked and why there aren't more of these agreements today. So a contract was agreed to between a manufacturer and a payer. There were some specific outcomes, to which the ultimate price of the drug were attached. The way the adjudication or the operationalization of that contract worked, they agreed to terms up front in the absence of any data on how the product was already performing in the population. A year later, the payer, the health plan, sends data to the manufacturer, and it's not just a de-identified data file. It's the kind of patient-level data that I would call a disabled data file, because it has to be completely scrubbed of most relevant patient information before it can be sent to the manufacturer, who then analyzed for the outcomes and rendered the answer. It was sort of like showing up at the Academy Awards with the black suitcase and opening it and saying, and here's the winner. That is cumbersome. That process is devoid of trust. That process is operationally a lot of work for the plan to provide and scrub a file. And so those are the kinds of barriers that I think have to go away if we're to get what we can from value-based, if we're to achieve the potential in value-based contracts. But it's precisely what I think a lot of companies, RxAnti included, but certainly not the only one, are really focused on simplifying. That if you can create a standardized set of measures around the value of a medicine, and if you can report them repeatedly so that everybody can see the score, both parties, over the course of a contract, then you have the opportunity to now negotiate on the value that's being delivered. And so I think that over time, there's enough data available. But if we can reach trust by having neutral intermediaries in the process, then we can achieve more of the potential.
So do you think it's a solvable problem?
I do think it's a solvable problem. It's not an answer to prices. So prices are a place that also, work has to happen, because value is not just about price. Value is about price and benefit, and contracting in a way that ties the two together.
Right. Yeah. But it's not just benefit. Go ahead, Dorothy, and then I have a
I
follow-up
agree.
question for you.
The contracts that are put in place, they can be administratively challenging, but there are things that we can do today. So I mentioned we as a company, there are other companies trying to pilot the value-based contracting arrangements. Sometimes the measures are adherence-based. Sometimes they're truly measuring an actual outcome. But one of the things that we point to, you had asked the question about our work with Anthem and what do we say in the policy paper, right. How are we defining value? We pointed to several policy barriers that are standing in the way for being able to meaningfully move into the value-based payment space for pharmaceuticals. And they include things like the anti-kickback statute, which governs the transfer of value between across our sectors. So things within that anti-kickback statute that chill or prevent us from meaningfully being able to move beyond the pilot phase for a value-based contract include things like a data analytics safe harbor. So that to the extent that we want to pay RxAnti to administer a value-based contract, that transfer of value, whether it's from Lilly, maybe Express Scripts or a national account payer, that payment, is it a kickback or is it not? There are questions around warranty, and Steve made a comment of that earlier. The warranty safe harbor was never meant to envision and contemplate healthcare. So the question is, should it? Especially as we're starting to look at value-based contracting arrangements. And then finally, we have an outdated adherence safe harbor. Our company, other healthcare entities, payers, sometimes have adherence programs. What's the role of an adherence program within a value-based contract? Ours, we do not create or provide any sort of supplemental adherence support to drive the outcome of a value-based contracting arrangement, but there's an open question around how is that handled.
Would you like to be able to do that?
We would not want to drive toward a specific outcome. We want to be able to truly try and measure the outcome that the value-based contract is supposed to deliver. And then finally, I would say with government price reporting, whether we're talking about Medicaid best price, or government price reporting overall, again, these value-based arrangements have a time element to them. So we're going to have to go back at the end of a value-based contract and actually report back to the government. That's not a barrier that we can't say we're not going to put in place a value-based contract, but it makes it more complicated.
I see.
So safe harbors, we are calling for in our work with Anthem, safe harbors that would allow us to move to move beyond piloting value-based arrangements and making these a reality in the marketplace.
We have some questions coming in from the audience, and I'd like to try and address a couple of those. I'll start with one on best price, and maybe Jeff can start with that. As you've mentioned it already a little bit, and I think you also how big of a problem or barrier is the existing best price regulations and statutes to doing value-based purchasing?
Well, it's a mixed blessing. If you think about when they did the MDRP in 1990, where Medicaid plans were not getting a reduction in cost that other segments of healthcare was getting, the idea was to put in some requirement for rebate. It's now, for a branded drug, at the start, 23.1% or best price. And the or best price creates an interesting dynamic in the marketplace. That when the best price is provided to Medicaid, and remember, the rebates don't go to the plans, that goes to the states and the feds, but the plans have to pick up the cost generally in the states where they have the drug benefit as part of the benefit. It means the rebate's flowing somewhere else, the cost is flowing into some federal match, and the way that best price works, it works as both a shield and a sword. So that in the commercial space, many pharmaceutical manufacturers will say, I'd love to give you a rebate, but can't go more than this because then I get impacted by best price, and that's 1 in 5 Americans, so I can't really do that. So it creates this artificial cap. But the other thing that it does, and in my view, one of the challenges with the drug rebate program, which is forcing pharma to price, frankly, irrationally, is that it creates an artificial discount not based on volume, which, of course, is a cost of doing business, so they build it into the cost of the drug. And I think from our point of view, the best price item in a fee-for-service marketplace had some, made sense. But in a Medicaid marketplace where 1 in 5 Americans get access to health care via Medicaid and 73% of them are in full risk contracts where the plans are taking all the physical risk of an individual, if you put that rebate and risk into the plan and allowed us to get out of best price, then you start to see real discussion about what is the ultimate total cost of care for a particular service using that drug. The other unique challenge around best price is that CMS, for those of you who are in the pharmaceutical world, CMS put out a 5-page document about ways to do value-based purchasing that wouldn't impact best price. If you haven't had a chance to read it, here's the short version, read the regs. That was what they said, basically. And here's a drop box, tell us what you're doing because we have no idea. That's basically what those 5 pages said. And I think from our point of view, when you look at that and we try and go to manufacturers, the challenge for them is if they get into a value-based purchasing arrangements wrapped by a supplemental rebate that CMS or DOJ comes back later and says, oh, that looks like anti-kickback to me, or gee, that doesn't look like it actually excludes you from best price and the rebate you gave is now eligible to everybody. That's not productive. And so I think we really wanted CMS to come forward with some real guidelines to help manufacturers and payers come to these types of arrangements, and we still think they can. We're hoping they come revisit it. But that's where I think we look at best price. It is like I said, a shield and a sword, and it is certainly it is as big a challenge for Medicaid payers, I believe, as it is for pharmaceutical manufacturers.
Anybody else want to comment?
I'll tell you that when we do these value-based contracts, best price is actually a big deal. So let me give you a great example. We do indication-based reimbursement for some classes of drugs. So I'll take a cancer example. You have a cancer drug that will extend your life 5.2 months. For lung cancer, it'll extend your life 12 days in pancreatic cancer. When in your life do you ever pay the exact same amount for something that works 1/10 as well? Well, you shouldn't. And so the reality is we want to reimburse the pharmaceutical company differently for pancreatic cancer versus lung cancer. We want patients with pancreatic cancer to be able to try the drug should they want to try it. But the reality is that it's not going to be as valuable to the average pancreatic patient. So we'd like to reimburse at a lower price. Does that become the new best price? Because if I pay 1/10 as much for that one patient, is the pharmaceutical manufacturer on the hook now to provide that best price for all Medicaid patients, even the lung cancer patients? So what we've done to get around that is we now do a blended average. So we're able to spread the discount across all the patients, but we've had to jump through these hoops to get around the best price. I will tell you that in our view, best price sets a floor under drug price, and so it doesn't set a ceiling. And so it's actually raising the price for everyone. And so I think the regulations do need to be looked at again, because in a simple way, if we got rid of the best, we have to do something to protect the poorest in our community. And Medicaid does need to get advantages over the commercial marketplace, but the best price regulation is probably not the best way to do that.
We had a question that I think we've touched on a little bit, but people are intrigued but hungry for some more details on how these plans actually get written. Are there key points from the experience that you have so far that we haven't already talked about, either examples with specific classes of drugs or approaches in building a partnership on this value-based contracting that you might be able to tell us about to illuminate some of the specifics on the experience so far?
Yeah, I can start. So these have been, as you can tell by the amount of enrollment we've had, wildly popular with our plans because they achieve better health outcomes at a lower cost. When I talked about the rheumatoid arthritis one, it allows us to actually have a broader formulary. So doctors have more choices, patients have more choices, and there's this warranty where money comes back if the patient switches. The one big problem with all these things is often the money is going back to the plan and not to the patient. Now that's a pro and a con. What do plans do with this money? Those plans use that to keep the premium price down. But in this era of high deductible health plans, that's very difficult on individual patients. My view is high deductible plans are designed for rich people, they're sold to poor people. Not too many of us have $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 in our checking account so that when we hit that high deductible. And the other thing about medication high deductibles that's unique versus medical high deductibles is if you come to my hospital and you need an appendectomy, you get the appendectomy and then I come after you for the money. If you go to the pharmacy counter for your cancer treatment and you're in the high deductible phase and they ask for $2,000 and you don't have the $2,000, you don't get the product. And that's unacceptable. And so we have got to do something to address it. And we've done something recently with Lilly as an experiment, which we're really excited about, and that is for patients without insurance or patients in the donut hole or the high deductible phase, we're now using our rebates for those patients to give them the rebated discount at the pharmacy counter. So at least they're not being asked to pay full sticker price. And so this has been very successful. We're excited to expand this because we think that this is a game changer in that it will really help patients in the high deductible phase or even those that are uninsured.
Dorothy, there's a question related to this now that's directed to you, which asks if you could elaborate on how changes in benefit designs and this value proposition get communicated to members. I'll open it up to other people, but since the audience was particularly interested in your take,
well, I think
what do
that
you think?
Steve's example of the partnership that we've developed to pass the rebate through to patients within a high deductible health plan is one example of how patients can actually benefit from a value-based contracting arrangement. We're very early days on our journey for value-based contracting arrangements, and we would love to be able to see a future where the benefit design that is created by health plans actually tie in to the value-based payments for pharmaceuticals. Steve referenced that the savings come back, to the system in the form of lower premiums, et cetera. But if the outcomes of a value-based contract could actually flow to an individual, that would be a wonderful thing to see. Now, what that looks like and how we get there, I'm not sure. But what we're trying to do is, for us at Lilly, is we're trying to start a national conversation about this topic of high deductible health plans and healthcare consumerism. In fact, we're kicking off a series of idea incubators starting in May in San Francisco in partnership with Health Affairs and others to talk about the transition that's taken place, or the drift that I referenced earlier, from traditional insurance to high deductible health plans, and how is it that across our healthcare sector overall we can start to address this topic. I don't know if we ever considered the impact of high deductible health plans on individuals overall. And you think about the average income for a family of four is $57,000 a year. Our economy still, we're just starting to turn a corner there. We're asking people to have more and more financial responsibility, not just for education, but for their retirement and now for health. I'm not commenting on that policy overall, but we do have a challenge and an opportunity in front of us to think about how can we engage and empower people to really be consumers in their health care. Our system is not set up like that at all at this point in time. I think companies like RxAnti and other health tech companies are trying to move us in that direction, and that's a great thing. But that's something that we need to continue to look at and address and work productively around.
Josh, on the specifics of how these things are now being crafted, are there any insights beyond the ones you've already offered that might be of interest to folks?
Yeah, I think I'll try to avoid repeating things I said earlier, but one thing that I might add that would be new is specifically one party in all of these agreements is accountable for the patient's use of the medication. In some contracts, that incentive lies with the manufacturer. It's the manufacturer's risk if the patient doesn't take the medication appropriately. In other contracts we've seen, it's the plan who bears that risk. And I guess I would just highlight that as a really important point to think about, because right now it can be very difficult for whoever's most at risk for proper utilization or adherence by the patient to reach out and engage that patient and improve that element of performance. And so we spend a lot of time thinking with our clients and actually designing programs to be able to do just that, to reach out and engage a prescriber and or a patient in the interest of improving performance so that these contracts work better for everyone.
Steve, there was a question that came up, I don't know if you saw it, was when it comes to drug failure and the warranty provision, do some of these agreements give some money back to the patient directly, or does it go back only to the insurer or employer?
Yeah, so we actually have the ability right now to, instead of giving the rebate back to the plan, we actually have the ability to do the rebate at the point of sale. And so we can actually, for some of our clients, give the individual patient the rebate. The trouble with that is that most plans don't want to do that. Because if you think about what most plans do with their pool of money for rebates, they usually apply it to the premium to keep the cost of health care down across everyone. Whereas if you give the rebate just to the one individual, that sick patient still has an enormous health burden, but they're also using up all the rebates, so everyone else's premiums go up. But for plans, we do have the ability to do it. When it comes to these warranty programs right now, we only have the ability to give it back to the plan and not back to the individual patient. If the plan therefore wants to give it to the patient, they can, but that's administratively very complex. And so most plans like to use it to help the entire population and not just the one individual.
Okay, thanks. There was one other question that was very specific, and I'll throw it out there for anybody who wants to tackle it or not, which is, do drug shortages have an effect on the ability of these agreements to work?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of information about drug shortages. Remember, if you've seen one drug shortage, you've seen one drug shortage. That is, almost all of them have different scenarios of why they're occurring, be it regulatory reasons, manufacturing reasons, or other things. What's unique in the United States now is for the first time we're seeing shortage of generic products. The generic market used to be a self-regulating market that really worked. because when the price of a generic product would start going up, other companies would reactivate their license. They'd jump back in the fray, and we always had adequate supply of generic products. Most of you may not realize it today. We don't have bicarbonate in hospitals. It's a national crisis. But there's also a lot of other very simple generic products that aren't readily available. Part of the problem is the delay at the FDA. So the FDA has a backlog of approvals and up until recently could not prioritize a shortage drug and actually approve it faster than a non-shortage drug. They had to take the applications in the order that they came. That has actually recently been fixed, and that backlog's coming down. The other thing, though, is that there is now a market dynamic where companies are specifically buying generics that are made by single manufacturers and driving up the price in a reprehensible way. We saw this, the most egregious one was Daraprim, but we've seen this in several other things. So generic price increase is a new phenomenon in the United States. There are regulatory ways to fix this, but until we take on some of those regulations, and we also have, until we have manufacturers that essentially agree that there's a social contract between payers and manufacturers where you shouldn't be gouging the marketplace, we will not see this solved.
I would just add a thought to that, which is that it's the shortages caused by single manufacturer situations are an example of what happens when we become overly focused on price. Price can actually, the economists who study this will tell you price can actually get too low, to the point that, as Steve pointed out, all but one manufacturer disappear from the party. There's no longer any multiple source situation, and then that one remaining manufacturer can change prices. So I think it does bring us back to the concept that this isn't all about price. It's about the global value that a product brings, and this will require policy solutions in order to address the shortage issue.
Steve, I had a couple other questions. One that I'm going to start with for you, which is, and then Dorothy, maybe you can comment. How willing are drug makers to have the conversation about doing a value-based arrangement? What is it that sort of motivates them to either say, yeah, let's have that conversation and maybe do something, and who are the ones who are saying, well, no, we're not there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's a spectrum, and there are companies that truly believe this drug pricing issue is a temporary problem, it will pass, and they're pulling the cover over the foxhole and don't want to address it at all. There are other companies that truly say we have to have a new value prop, we have to have a new solution if we're going to be sustainable for the future. Remember, America is 4.6% of the world's population. We're 33% of world drug spend. We are 50 to 70% of pharmaceutical profitability. So we're subsidizing the rest of the world. And so we know that we have to change this paradigm. We know it's becoming unaffordable. And so you will find that over time, almost all the companies are engaging in these conversations. Some of them are just in the engaging in conversation phase still, but many more are actually really interested in getting into these contracts because they know it's the right thing to do. But then there's the laggers. There's a couple out there, and I won't name them in the wall of shame.
Oh, come on.
But there's a couple who actually just believe that this will pass.
Okay. Dorothy, I mean, your company is one that's doing it.
We want to see this. We want to see the transition. We want to be part of the change. You know, some of the macro drivers that we look at, I mean, you look at, by 2018, HHS set a goal that 80% of payments, provider payments, would be tied to value-based payments. You have a goal of 50% participation in alternative payment models. That same type of payment innovation isn't happening or isn't demanded of our industry at this point in time, and we think it ought to be. And that's why we're driving towards value-based contracting arrangements and value-based payments. You know, at times we're initiating the conversation with payers or others. Sometimes they're coming to us with ideas that they have as well. And it's not just on the commercial side. We've actually had some state Medicaid plans approach us to look at value-based contracting arrangements too. We haven't actually signed a value-based contracting arrangement with a state Medicaid plan. We've come very close. But one of the tripping points has been the factor of the two-way risk. It's not a value-based contract isn't just a pretty price control or an expensive price control dressed up. We're really trying to measure outcomes. We're both going at risk, and for one of our potential partners, we just couldn't quite get it over the line. But we're working on all channels, all lines of business, and seeing where this could lead us in the future.
Jeff, what about the last word? Got a few seconds left.
So I get to start and end?
You can start and end.
That's big.
Yeah.
Look, this is going to be an issue we're going to be talking about a long time. There is a lot of discussion about where the value in pharma is going to be and who's going to pay for it. But ultimately, this is a societal issue about how much you're willing to provide cost and value to be disassociated. So we'll see. Thank you for having me. And I know we'll be involved in it a lot, and I look forward to hearing other people's thoughts.
Please join me in thanking the panelists for what I thought was a great discussion.